very much. And let me just get myself set up here. There we are. Good. So thank you very much. And let me begin by expressing my appreciation to Deputy Director General Mr. Rolando Tunpala, to Mr. Tomu Kozumi, the country representative for UNICEF, to the UN Resident Coordinator, Dr. Luisa Carvalho, Dr. Arunasalam Rasapan, the Senior Advisor for the Center for Development and Research and Evaluation, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to say how pleased I am to have this opportunity to participate in the second M&E network here in Manila. I can see by the audience gathered here together in the room that monitoring and evaluation in the Philippines is indeed flourishing. And I'm looking forward to learning more about the activities of the monitoring and evaluation community. And of course, I hope to hear something about the ways in which monitoring and evaluation is helping to drive performance, ensure transparency, and improve accountability along the road to development, peace, and prosperity in the Philippines. I first visited the Philippines about 10 years ago and attended a workshop on participatory monitoring and evaluation. As I recall, I was supposed to be there as a resource person, but of course I ended up taking away much more than I actually brought to the meeting. I think it was the mark of a good meeting. So I returned to Manila with high expectations, and it's a very personal pleasure to be here once again. The forum has several complementary aims. First of all, to share experience and advocate for effective measurement of performance and results in development interventions, whether these are policies, programs, or projects. Secondly, to debate the ways and means of taking an equity perspective to ensure that the situation of marginalized and excluded groups is better understood through monitoring and evaluation, and we hope that then, of course, leads to improvements in the situation of excluded and marginalized groups. And thirdly, to discuss the relevance of a national evaluation policy framework for promoting and facilitating accountability to citizens. And it's the last of these three themes, evaluation policy, that I would like to focus on this morning. A robust evaluation policy should help to ensure that evaluation plays its proper role in strengthening development programs and public services. Evaluation can help to improve performance by ensuring that decision makers, implementers, and stakeholders learn what works well and what works less well under various sets of circumstances. Evaluation should also, most importantly, be able to show who is gaining from programs or services and who is missing out. In this way, it helps to ensure transparency and so provides a basis for accountability not only internally within the administration, but also externally to the general public, including those citizens intended to benefit, and indeed those who may be adversely affected by development interventions. Public policy as a subject is not always well understood, and it's not always a very welcome topic of discussion. In preparing for this meeting, I looked at some of the classical Roman authors, and I discovered that Cicero, the great Roman orator, is supposed to have warned against raising the issue of public policy. He said, avoid any specific discussion of public policy at public meetings. And he was murdered soon afterwards by the emperor's people, on the orders of the emperor. So beware what you say in public places. But as evaluators, of course, we need the courage to speak and speak truth to power. Many people only want to talk about the policies that are of interest to them. Clint Eastwood, the movie actor, once joked about firearms control. And he said, I have a very strict gun control policy. If there's a gun around, I want to be in control of it. So public policy is something that we could always laugh about, but it's a very serious matter, of course, and we need to understand how we can use public policy for the best results to our citizens. As a subject, evaluation policy is very much an issue of the moment. At UNICEF, our executive board approved an evaluation policy for the organisation in 2008, and we're now reviewing it with the aim of presenting a new and updated policy to the board next year. A number of other agencies are currently developing or renewing their evaluation policies. For example, UNEP recently reviewed and updated its evaluation policy, while UNFPA and UN Women are currently preparing their evaluation policies. Among the bilateral agencies, USAID revised its evaluation policy a couple of years ago, while the British and French development agencies are currently reviewing and revising their evaluation policies. And I recently heard that the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is preparing a new evaluation policy. So the issue is very current, and it's very good to see that here in the Philippines, evaluation policy is very much a subject of the moment. In several cases, the push to prepare or update a policy has arisen from internal institutional changes, but more generally we can perhaps see this as a response to the changing landscape of international development. The change is captured in the final statement from the Busan High-Level Forum, which laid emphasis on development effectiveness rather than aid effectiveness, and on country-led development rather than donor-driven interventions. And we are seeing all around the world the rise of emerging economies and, despite increasing inequality, improvements in social indicators and the quality of life for many of the most disadvantaged people. So we see a new development scenario unfolding. And of course here today you'll be able to tell me whether the establishment of the Philippines M&E Group is also an initiative which responds to this new development agenda. Speaking on behalf of UNICEF, I can say we're delighted to be partners in the M&E network. And I look forward to hearing more about the activities of the network in the next 2 days, and indeed in the months to come. So to recap, there's a lot of interest currently in evaluation policy, but what is policy? Policy can sometimes seem to be a difficult and complex area. It's quite hard to find a convenient definition of the term. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary provides several definitions. It says, a definite course or method of action selected from among alternatives and in light of given conditions to guide and determine present and future direction. Present and future decisions. It also says a high-level overall plan embracing the general goals and acceptable procedures, especially of a government body. But for present purposes, I'd like to highlight 3 points. The first is that policy makes choices from amongst alternatives. It rules certain kinds of action in and rules other kinds of action out. So we can't do everything, we can't have our cake and eat it at the same time. Secondly, policy is purposeful. It directs attention, action and resources towards certain goals. A gender equality policy focuses on steps which would promote greater equality between women and men. It draws attention to the issues and defines the policy problems to be addressed, and should set out the measures and indicators against which improvement is to be assessed. It may prescribe certain kinds of action to address inequalities and may devote human, financial and institutional resources to address the problem. While the details of any given policy can be complex and indeed often contested, and this is where policy meets politics, I would like today to approach the subject of evaluation policy with some simple questions. What is evaluation policy? What does it look like? What does it do? Why is it important? Why indeed help to improve performance and accountability? Will it help to improve performance and accountability? The subject of our discussions in the next couple of days. And can we see it as truly a gateway towards performance improvement and development? First, to answer the question, what is evaluation policy, let me briefly take UNICEF's evaluation policy as an example. This has the following elements. First of all, the policy sets out the strategic role of evaluation in relation to UNICEF's medium-term strategic plan. It outlines the scope of the policy, emphasizing the organization-wide scope of the policy, and at the same time distinguishing evaluation from other oversight mechanisms, such as audit and indeed monitoring itself, monitoring and evaluation being distinct activities. It sets out the purpose of evaluation and how it should be used. It enumerates a set of guiding principles for the evaluation function, drawing on the norms and standards defined by the UN Evaluation Group. And importantly, it sets out the various accountabilities for evaluation within UNICEF, who is responsible for what. It touches on joint evaluation and other forms of other evaluation activities with partners, and this includes support for national evaluation capacity development. So that's an important part of what UNICEF tries to do in its work. And it also sets out particular measures and actions intended to strengthen the evaluation system. Last and not least, the policy calls for review and revision after an appropriate period, which is what we're now doing in UNICEF. After all, as evaluators, we should practice what we preach. In short, the evaluation policy sets out the rules of the game regarding evaluation efforts in UNICEF, including some simple measures against which UNICEF's performance in implementing the policy can be assessed. So this brings us to our next question. Why is evaluation policy important? To turn to UNICEF again for a moment, I believe it has been a powerful tool to promote the gradual strengthening of the evaluation function across the organization. This is particularly difficult when you consider how decentralized and how varied UNICEF's work is around the world. As stated in the policy itself, the purpose, and I quote, "The purpose of the evaluation policy is to ensure that UNICEF has timely, strategically focused, and objective information on the performance of its policies, programs, and initiatives to produce better results for children and women. The policy aims to foster a common institutional understanding of the evaluation function in UNICEF and further strengthen evidence-based decision-making and advocacy, transparency, coherence, and effectiveness." I believe that although much remains to be done, UNICEF's evaluation policy has been increasingly successful in fulfilling these aims. It's going beyond the words on the page, the words that were agreed by our executive board, and has begun to make a real difference. That UNICEF's evaluation policy has served not so much as a gateway, which is the theme of the overall theme of the workshop today, but more as an umbrella. I think that this may often be the case with evaluation policies. Let me explain what I mean. A widely read textbook on evaluation is called Real-World Evaluation. As the title suggests, it does not deal with the ideal situation for undertaking the perfect evaluation, but instead addresses some key constraints which are widely encountered in undertaking evaluation activities. And I'm sure many of you in the room today have bumped into these real-world difficulties. Namely, lack of time. For example, when an evaluation is commissioned only a few weeks before a follow-on program is supposed to start, and yet the evaluation is supposed to inform that program. Lack of funds, and need we say more about lack of funds? We always seem to be scrambling for resources wherever we sit, somehow. And then limitations of data, available data. For example, where there's no baseline data, or where adequate monitoring information has not been recorded. And finally, not last and not least, the political constraints which bind us all, and of course the limited uptake of evaluation results, so that evaluation actually fulfills the purpose that is intended. So the authors of Real-World Evaluation touch on all of these issues, and they also touch on the limited availability in some locations of adequate evaluation skills and experience. The book provides excellent guidance on how to deal with these various real-world limitations, to secure credible evaluation results and help to ensure that they are appropriately and effectively used in decision-making. Yet, it's strange, perhaps, that the book makes very little reference to evaluation policy. This is a strange omission, because a sound evaluation policy, effectively implemented, would go a long way towards addressing and alleviating some of the constraints that they identify in the real world. Evaluation policy should specify when and where evaluation should be done, for what purpose, and clarity of purpose helps to ensure that all stakeholders understand why and how evaluation can be useful, and this in turn promotes the uptake of results. Indeed, the policy should also specify the mechanisms for the uptake of evaluation lessons learned and for responding to recommendations. The policy should specify the relevant evaluation standards, provide a guideline for the level of resources to be set aside for evaluation. While it's difficult to address data constraints through policy, it is at least possible to set out the framework of roles and responsibilities, which would include making adequate arrangements for monitoring a basic source of information for subsequent evaluation. Finally, and importantly, the policy should set out arrangements for protecting the independence and hence the credibility of the evaluation function and the evaluation evidence that it generates. This is not to say that self-evaluation is not important and useful, but some basic safeguards need to be in place to avoid conflicts of interest. So taking all this together, we can see that evaluation policy provides a kind of umbrella, shielding evaluation practitioners from some of the constraints and limitations found in the real world. A good evaluation policy, if implemented properly, can help to reduce threats and limitations and creates opportunities for evaluation work of high quality. But can it be a gateway? Of course, this is the word that's used in the title of the workshop. In closing, let me refer briefly to some work which has been set out in recent years by Bob Picciotto, who was formerly the Director General of Evaluation in the World Bank Group. And he was trying to describe the development landscape that's been emerging over the past decade or more, and in many ways the evaluation landscape that was described at the Busan conference. Indeed, since the world leaders endorsed the Millennium Declaration and signed up to the Paris Declaration. So he's picked out some dimensions which he asserts are critical for evaluation policy and practice. They're conveniently very alliterative, and we can call them the 5 A's. So the first is alignment. The second is aggregation. The third is familiar, it's accountability, a key term for us today. The fourth is attribution, which is linked closely to accountability. And the fifth is asymmetry. What I want to talk about is not all of these terms. I don't think we have time to go through all of them in detail, but the first and the last. So let me talk first about alignment. Here he's referring to the opportunity and incentive created by the MDGs to align development efforts with a coherent set of national goals within the broad framework created by the MDGs. A key role for evaluation policy is to make it clear that evaluation should assess how far development interventions are indeed aligned with national goals and help to ensure the coherence and effectiveness of national development efforts. The key issue here is, of course, the relevance of development efforts to national needs. Given the fragmentation and multiplicity of development efforts, evaluation can play an important part in assessing alignment and ultimately relevance to agreed national and indeed international goals and targets. Even more importantly, in my view, evaluation policy can direct attention to certain development policy goals which may be neglected because information is lacking, or because they are seen to be in the too hard to do box, or because people concerned do not have a strong voice. I'm talking, of course, about drawing attention to the needs and wishes of people who are marginalized for one reason or another, by geography, by age, social status, perhaps by disability, or indeed by gender. Inclusive development requires careful measurement of who wins or loses from development interventions and who is simply bypassed. This, of course, requires efforts to collect and analyze highly disaggregated data and to avoid unhelpful bias in gathering this data. Evaluation policy can make it clear that such efforts are required and are integral to successful and equitable development and are firmly aligned ultimately with the MDGs. In the interest of time, I won't go into talking too much about accountability and attribution and aggregation, except that they all hang together. If we're thinking about, particularly about accountability at this higher level, if you like at the national level, then we need to be thinking about aggregation. How do we bring results, particularly in a highly decentralized system, and I know the Philippines is highly decentralized, how do we aggregate these results so that at the national level we can develop a clear picture of what's been achieved and who's accountable for what. A set of quite tricky technical issues there, and an even more tricky set of technical issues around attribution. I don't want to talk about these issues now, but instead move on to the fifth A that Bob Picciotto refers to, which is the issue of asymmetry. The issue of asymmetry is an important one in the emerging development landscape. Development evaluation has its roots in the desire of donor governments to know whether or not aid funds were effective or not, and the discipline has been slow to respond to the call for country-led development, and indeed country-led evaluation. But if we're serious about the roles of monitoring and evaluation within a country framework, we need to see evaluation contributing to national decision-making processes, supporting learning and accountability not only upward to senior decision makers and ultimately to national parliaments and legislatures, but also downwards and outwards to citizens and those directly affected by development interventions. It's here above all that evaluation policy can play its part in ensuring that evaluation takes its due place within national and subnational structures of governance. A key element in any evaluation policy is to set out roles and responsibilities and define lines of accountability. These need to be clear, serving democratic institutions, while recognizing those who fund development processes will also need information on how funds are used and whether they are being used efficiently and effectively. A closely related issue is the question of national evaluation capacity development. This is an essential requirement, of course, for country-led evaluation. Skills and knowledge are needed not only by practicing evaluators, but also by those commissioning and using evaluations. Once again, a sound evaluation policy can set out goals and frameworks which can create incentives and channel efforts sufficiently towards the desired ends. So, coming to a close now, keeping the 5 A's in mind, is it appropriate to speak of evaluation policy as a gateway? And if so, where are we headed if we pass through the gateway? Perhaps we can describe evaluation policy as a gateway in the sense that it opens up a new development landscape. It's a landscape of obligations and responsibilities for the evaluator and the policymaker alike. A landscape of challenges, certainly, but also of possibilities and opportunities. It's the landscape envisaged by the participants at the high-level forum in Busan, where some of the asymmetries of the past are replaced by the development partnerships for the future. Evaluation has a role to play in helping to define this future, bringing to bear its methods and modalities to address innovation and progress, address barriers and bottlenecks, and inform decision makers and citizens about what makes for successful development. So let me stop there. I've been talking about evaluation policy as an umbrella, protecting the evaluation function, but I do believe at the higher level it's also a gateway to more successful development. Let me close here and once again express my appreciation to the organizers for inviting me here today, and say that once again I look forward to hearing the deliberations in the course of the next day or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk.
This morning, I noticed that there were assigned tables, but beyond 9:15, I think we can waive the reserved seats and hopefully enjoy all the people in the back side of the hall to take the front seats. We will be joining intermittently by some of our distinguished guest speakers in the next 2 days. But surely, it is heartwarming to see a large number of our invitees, resource persons, to join us in this year's, or our second MNE Forum. About the same time last year, somewhere in the north, particularly Ortega's Town Plaza, we gathered the same number, even quite a few less, of participants. And the idea then was to jumpstart our MNE Forum, and it also coincided with the launching of our MNE network. It is high time that when we were discussing the groundwork of this MNE Forum, that we in government, and joined by our development partners as well as civil society and academia, put our resources together, our knowledge, to make sure that the bureaucracy, particularly the Filipinos, benefit from the wealth of evaluation. And as you will see in later presentations, the Philippines has now over a decade or so, or almost 20 years, of doing things on both the M&E, and what we are really in search for is a coherent policy that would ensure the sustainability of the practice and use of evaluation. And the second M&E forum begins with a very good supportive environment. As you all are aware, the Philippine Development Plan has a results matrix, and the results matrix in turn is translated into a set of public investment programs. But beyond the boredom of documents is the central element of being results-oriented, results-focused, and performance-oriented. With the issuance of AO 25, and pardon me for talking bureaucrat language, BBM and NEDA, including the Development Academy of the Philippines and other oversight agencies, have banded together to ensure that the bureaucracy does perform in accordance not only with our mandates, but the results that we have vowed to pursue over the medium term and over the annual period, to a point that we will be rewarding good performers, and I think Director Eric can elaborate on this even further, that there will be good, better, best performers, with the best performers getting, I think, relatively hefty bonus this year. So the various agencies of government are rushing up to coming up with their best performance. We are supposed to meet this 90% of our deliverables beyond the other standards of governance. And we hope that this year, where we are initiating the AO 25, will instill in our minds and engender in the bureaucracy an evaluation culture. Things that we've been talking about for many, many years, and only now we are beginning to concretize. But AO 25 alone will not enable us to get the widespread and deep practice of evaluation. And this is where we are trying to make a pitch in this year's M&E Forum to craft, or at least initiate, a development evaluation policy that would guide government, including private sector hopefully, to join us in ensuring that we all draw from evaluation and benefit from evaluation to improve the chances of delivering on our development objectives, the so-called results. So what are our expectations in this second M&E Forum? As you will see in the agenda that Yas had described earlier, we have quite a menu of agenda items, a menu of topics. The idea was to be able to bring together the widest interest, but at the same time draw upon the topics and experiences of the well-chosen resource persons that we have today, including the participants from the floor. We would have accommodated you all to have your speaking lines, but because we're limited to 2 days and the budget, we are unable to cover you. But we hope that in the richness of the discussions, we will be able to participate and contribute to the achievement of our objectives. And just to cite what the M&E Forum envisions, we will continue to advocate the value of evaluation for good governance, and in this forum, hope to discuss our national evaluation policy framework to increase accountability towards its citizens. A welcome remarks as this would not be complete without giving our gratitude, extending our gratitude to our steadfast sponsors and supporters, in particular the UNICEF, who for 2 years have sustained its support, not just in words, but also in resources. I'm sure many of you have, one way or the other, also contributed to sustaining the M&E Forum on its second year. I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution and support of our development partners, including civil society, for making this happen. But I guess even if we had all the resources and support to mobilize, without the high energy team led by Director Eric, this would not have happened today on the same dates that we had our first MNE forum. And Tumo, I hope you will forgive me for citing also Hamad, who continues to be a regular feature at the NED is a Pasig, almost haunting me. Ronnie, where are you? We need to talk to you and discuss with you. But as I guess there is a persistence as well as expectations that results can be realized. As I was about to end my opening remarks, I cannot help but also acknowledge ASEC, Stella Loriano from the Department of Finance, who also is a regular feature of the NEDA. And I would have counted many, many more of you in the audience. But we have a full day agenda, and I look forward to a very rich discussion, candid, and more than the discussion, very specific contribution to our formulating a national evaluation policy. Thank you, and good day.
Thank you.
Secretary Resakam, PDG Compound, Ms. Gloria Steele of USAID, Dr. Rasapal, distinguished presenters, discussants, participants. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. On behalf of UNICEF, Secretary Resakam, PDG Compound, Ms. Gloria Steele of USAID, Dr. Rasapal, distinguished presenters, discussants, participants. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. On behalf of UNICEF, Secretary Resakam, PDG Compound, Ms. Gloria Steele of USAID, Dr. Rasapal, distinguished presenters, discussants, participants. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. On behalf of UNICEF, I'd like to congratulate NED officials, bilateral agencies, civil society organizations, the academics, the experts, and fellow UN and international organizations who are present here today for yet another success of this Monitoring Evaluation Forum. The presentations and deliberations in the last 2 days were so rich that I was really impressed. There's a good balance, I think, between conceptual rigors and also practical practices in the spirit of evaluation in the real world, as it was mentioned by Colin, my colleague, yesterday. Due to my pressing other engagement, I had to leave the venue after yesterday, but it was one of those workshops that I hated to leave. I'm not the evaluation specialist as such, so I feel less than adequate to speak in this forum. At the same time, as one of the managers, so to say, working in this area for development, I always try to ask myself 3 questions. Whenever and whatever issues UNICEF as an organization has been engaged in. They are, one is bottom line, and second one, proof of pudding, and third one, so what? In my own parlance, bottom line is what I consider the most important, or we consider the most important, or priority, in the spirit of first thing first. In evaluation term, it may be corresponding to result or indicators, as we shall measure what we consider as most important. Proof of pudding. It to me is a reality check, so to say, as to whether we are actually delivering the expected deliverables or not. It may correspond to quality evaluation, planned very in advance, as it was said during this forum, and not afterthought. the last one, so what? It's whether the deliverables we helped deliver have made any positive and also meaningful changes to the lives of concerned people for whom they were intended. And in the case of UNICEF, their children. It will also include actions that ensure for follow-up and also learning that we acquire in the process, which should help us to continue to improve what we do. The presentations and also the deliberations in the last 2 days are so pertinent to all these 3 points, and I personally learned a lot. I also think this event happened in a very timely manner, or it was so planned, of course, that the result can very naturally feed into the review of the Philippine Development Plan and also related instruments, and also formulation of the National Evaluation Policy Framework expected sometime next year. As it is, it serves as a very good prelude to the symphony that is going to ensue in the next year. On our part, UNICEF, as part of the UN team, will continue to support strengthening of the national M&D framework, as we believe it will play such a pivotal role in terms of clarifying the bottom line, proof of putting, and also the question of so what. We expect it to serve as one of the main forces behind further improvement of the lives of children at a scale level in the Philippines. Once again, my wholehearted congratulations to all of you, and I look forward to our continuous interaction and collaboration, and also meeting again in the third M&D Forum